Okay, so welcome back to my channel. I am Jason, and this is from Sin's Perspective Reviews. I wanted to wrap up Queens of Mystery Season 1, Part 2 of Murder in the Dark. So, it picks up where, obviously, the last episode left off with Tobias being buried under the bookshelf. So, of course, the noise drew everyone in, and they're kind of looking around, and then, of course, they eventually see Tobias under the bookshelves. And then they realize that Beth is there, Beth, Matilda's aunt. And so she's standing there holding a folder, and they're all like, okay, what the hell is going on, right? So the next time you see Beth is in a jail cell, because at this point, they're assuming that Beth is responsible for the two murders of Oscar and of Tobias. And so Matilda is there now examining the scene. Of course, Thorne is there, and of course Dr. Lynch is there, and basically they attempt to try to get the bookshelves off him, but they couldn't because, like I said, it was a domino effect, and you know, it was what it was. But obviously he was like, he died from the weight of the bookshelves crashing down on him, which of course we already knew. And so the next thing you see, Kat and Jane, they go to the police station to see Beth, but Terry is there, and they knew that he wouldn't just let them in. So they already had his mother on the phone. So when he told them no, they just handed him the phone, and his mom is, I guess she's saying whatever she's saying to him, like, you need to let them in, and you know, the whole thing. And then I guess she asked him what he wanted for afternoon tea, and he said alphabet spaghetti. So I'm like, oh Lord, alphabet spaghetti. Anywho, so he eventually lets him in and tells him that they got 10 minutes. So we find out, they start asking him questions because of course Beth has been pulling this disappearing act, you know, this entire time. People haven't been able to get in contact with her, the whole thing, her lying about not knowing Oscar. So now they have an opportunity to ask her, like, what's going on? And so she ends up telling them that Oscar had found an article that referenced Dragomir. And of course, their facial expressions changed. Like, okay. The reason this is so important is because Dragomir, he was a researcher that was part of some Edgar Allan Poe society doing research on how or why Edgar Allan Poe died. There was some other stuff going on. And Matilda's mother worked for him as a researcher. The timing of it is because shortly after he arrived, that's when Matilda's mom became pregnant. So they're kind of speculating. They didn't say this, but it's leaving you to think that maybe Dragomir is actually Matilda's father. But for some reason at this point, they don't want her to know this. Obviously, I mean, there has to be more to it than that. And the fact that they were so concerned about it. So that's why she, you know, she's been kind of incognito and not really talking and saying much, because she's trying to run around trying to gather this information to protect Matilda. And so they're now saying, okay, so what are we going to do? They was like, well, we have to find out who the actual murderer is so that they can let her go. I mean, that's really, at this point, that's the only thing that's going to get her out of prison, because she was seen arguing with Oscar, and she was obviously in the library when Tobias died. So, you know, they could build a pretty strong case against her if they're not able to find out who actually committed the murders. So Kat barges into Isabella Wolf's room, and she throws Isabella's book along with the book she printed from Sadie's hard drive, and she realized it's the same story. And so Isabella had to admit that she stole Sadie's book. Sadie was an up-and-coming writer, and of course she went to Isabella for her opinion, for her professional opinion, you know, this person that she admired and this whole thing. And then the next thing you know, she saw, once Isabella's book came out, she realized that Isabella had stole her book. And so when she confronted Isabella basically threatened her, basically saying that if she says anything, that she'll never become a writer, she'll never work in that industry, and basically threatened her to shut her up. And so, of course, Kat is not happy with this, and Isabella ended up committing suicide. And that's what she started talking about when Oscar left her room that night. that that morning we saw Oscar leaving her room, he had confronted her because he had figured it out. And he had confronted her about what the situation with Sadie, and knowing that she stole Sadie's work, and how basically he felt like she's responsible for Sadie's death. And he basically gave her 48 hours to come clean, or he was going to tell everybody that she was a fraud. And so basically they left on a bad note, because obviously no creative person, writer, artist, whoever, the idea of stealing someone's work is a point to them, because nobody would want that done to them. So obviously Kat is not happy with Isabella, and she basically voiced the same sentiment that Oscar did about how she felt like Isabella played a role in Sadie committing suicide, even though obviously Isabella doesn't want to take any responsibility for that. So Matilda is now interviewing Beth, and Terry is there to observe the interview. And every question that Matilda asked her, she was like, no comment, no comment, no comment. She really didn't want to say anything at all. But she did say that, I love you like a daughter, and that I would never lie to you, or do anything to hurt you, when she did lie to her. And that I'm not capable of something like this. And so eventually Thorne came in, because he was watching the interview from the next room. And he called Matilda out and basically said that he wanted her to charge Beth for the murders. And of course she doesn't want to charge her aunt, because she doesn't really believe that her aunt is responsible for the murders. And so he gave her 2 hours to find evidence to the contrary, or he was going to move forward with charging Beth. And so while she was still at the station, she got a call from Jane telling her that she needs to come back to the castle, because Guy Ashton is up on the roof, and he's threatening to commit suicide. So of course Matilda arrives, and she goes up to the roof, and Emily and Benjamin are already up there trying to talk him down. And she's trying to figure out, okay, so what happened? What caused this? And Emily said he got fired. And so it's that, him being fired, on top of his grief, because he did care for Oscar, and then they're feeling like he's also responsible for Oscar's death and Tobias' death. It was a lot. So he was ready to end it all. And then of course the bells and whistles starts going off for something he's having in the midst of having a heart attack. So she ends up all three of them end up having to pull him down, and the whole paramedics and the whole thing. So while they were loading him up into the ambulance, Jane was, she said hi to, it was George and Matt, the 2 paramedics. And so Matilda's like, do you know everybody in this town? And she was like, well, yeah, I've been there my whole life, so, duh. So Jane started telling Matilda about the report that she found, the part of the report that she found in Maximilian's fireplace. And she did some research, and she found out that he was stealing. He was taking money off the top. He was stealing from Oscar. He was actually shorting Oscar every month. And as they were talking, you kind of saw Maximilian. He's kind of ducking and through the bushes and trying to sneak away to get to his car. And so he got to the car, and so of course they ran to try to catch up with him. But Jane was already one step ahead. She'd already disabled his car, so he couldn't start his car. So of course they caught up with him. They talked to him for a while, and eventually he ended up having to admit that he was stealing from Oscar. And when Oscar confronted him, he basically told Max that he wanted 51% of his company in order for him not to press charges. So he's like, you can give me 51% of the company, or you could just lose everything when I sue you behind for theft, grand larceny, or embezzlement, or whatever the case may be. I don't know. Maybe embezzlement. I don't know. Basically, you gonna pay me one way or the other. And so they was like, okay, so that was your motive, because you didn't, you worked all these years, so obviously you didn't want to give up half of your company. He was like, well, no, even as a minority shareholder, I still stood to make more money with Oscar, and I got the added benefit of him being a lifetime, him being attached to the company for a lifetime. So he still got the benefits of the company, whatever, the company makes, along with Oscar being a permanent author for the agency. So he's like, I stood to make more money with Oscar Oscar alive. So, you know, it made sense. So they didn't take him down for the murder, but of course he did end up going to prison. They took him down for the theft. So Matilda, she gets back to the police station, and Thorne is standing there by the door, like he's looking at his clock, and she get there, and she doesn't have any additional information at this point, and he basically told her, you need to charge Beth. And he's like standing behind her, like really forcing her to charge Beth for some reason. Like he has a vendetta against this family, like you need to charge her. And while just as she was about to read her Aunt Beth her rights, Terry walks in and was like, you need to come and talk to so-and-so. And so, of course, Thorne is like, well, give her a minute. He was like, no, this is important. So, of course, he's now frustrated because he really want to take Beth down for some reason. So what Matilda found out was that Benjamin was there, and he was confessing to both murders. And he basically was talking about professional jealousy and how he was jealous of Oscar, and Oscar was an upstart, and losing the pickaxe award was the last straw. And he talked about Tobias, how Tobias was his agent, and how Tobias had this horrible gambling problem, and Tobias would always borrow money from him to pay his debts but never pay him back, and he had just had enough, right? So with all that, they end up having to let Beth go, much to the chagrin of Inspector Thorne. So Matilda and her aunts are now back at Jane's bookshop. They're celebrating. It's her first case. She was able to resolve it. And, while they're celebrating, Matilda still had some unease about, like, there was something nagging at her. There was some unanswered questions. And they started talking about the missing pages. And it took Matilda back to when she realized that Lady Hildine actually had some pictures removed, and she claimed that she had sent them away to have them redone because, I guess the frames are old or whatever the case may be. So Matilda ends up going to this windmill where this guy, it's his workshop, I guess it's where he lives as well, to get the photos that Lady Hildine had sent out. And after examining the photos, she ended up going back to the castle, and she started talking to Lady Hildine. And Lady Hildine basically said that the whole book about Brown Bread was the name of Oscar's new book, and with the whole story of the murder on the estate. And she started talking about how she actually planned the power outage, because the goal was she gave Oscar the pickaxe award because she felt that when they went to, the festivities, that she would be able to go into his room and read the last few pages of the manuscript to see if it implicated her father in the murder. I mean, then she originally admitted that it was her father that committed the murder, and because the guy was having an affair with her mother. But of course, she didn't want that to get out. She's like, my mother is 93 years old. We can't deal with no scandal at this stage in her life. It will probably finish her off. So that's why I sent the photos out. She sent the photos out because there was a photo of her mother with an eye patch, and there was the mention of a woman in the book with an eye patch. And so she felt that people wouldn't make the connection. So her sending the pictures out was a way of kind of people wouldn't immediately make the connection. So that's why she sent the photos out and the whole thing. And then Matilda said, okay, so I bet you Benjamin was disappointed. And she was like, well, what are you talking about? Because in the first, I don't know if I said this in the first video, it was said that Benjamin was induced to come to this year's ceremony because she promised that he would win the award. And she was like, so she was taken aback, like, what do you mean? What about Benjamin? She was like, so I was, under the impression that you induced him to come because you said that he would win the award. She was like, well, no, I didn't have to do that because I knew all I had to do was invite Oscar. And Matilda was like, she wasn't immediately making a connection. She was like, Benjamin is in love with Emily. And I know that wherever Oscar goes, Emily goes. And wherever Emily goes, if Benjamin can go, he would come too, because he would do anything for her. Now remember, Benjamin went to the station and confessed to 2 murders. Okay? So now it has Matilda's, the wheels are spinning. And after Matilda left the bookshop, they started talking about the manuscript, and how if they were able to see the manuscript, maybe they could probably see where something might click, or something might ring a bell. And so Jane admitted that Matilda had fallen asleep reading it, and so she had made copies. So now they're all sitting around reading through this manuscript to try to find like some more pieces to the puzzle to help Matilda. So, but Matilda her wheels are already spinning. So she went into Emily's room and she found the missing pages. So what she found out was that the alleged missing pages that she saw when she entered the castle the following morning after the murder were fake. The ending, so the original pages had a different ending. And of course, once we get to the part, you'll find out why she didn't really care for the ending. So Matilda, like I said, she's searching the room. She found the pages. Eventually the door cracked. She realized that somebody's out there. Now she's giving chase, trying to find out, who it was. Eventually she realized that it's Emily. And so she's now talking to Emily. The thing is, everybody thought that Emily was in love with Oscar. But Emily wasn't in love with Oscar. Emily was in love with Charlie Palmer, Oscar's creation. And so in this book, Oscar had really, at this point, considered Charlie Palmer to be an albatross around his neck. He was like, basically, that's all people ever wanted from him. He was tired, probably burned out. And in this last book, he was going to kill Charlie Palmer off. And so, of course, Emily didn't want that. And so, eventually, Emily appears behind Matilda. A fight ensues. She was getting the best of Matilda. Matilda got a few licks in. And eventually, she had Matilda pinned down. And she was choking the crap out of Matilda. Her aunts, had already made the connection. They had gone through the process of elimination, made the connection, and then by the time they arrived in time to knock the shit out of Emily with the book, knocked her out, and was able to save their niece. And so obviously Matilda was extremely grateful. Now, to be honest, I would expect Matilda to be a better fighter, but you know what? We all do the best we can. So so they get her in the back of the car, the police car, Emily, and then the aunts are talking, and so they're now making the connection. She killed, obviously, Oscar because she didn't want the real ending to be published, which would be killing her true love of Charlie Palmer. But at the same time, killing the author would mean that the series still ended, so there wouldn't be any more books anyway. Anywho, but her rationale was giving her something else, I guess. And when Tobias found out, because he saw her posting the fake pages on the board that they eventually saw the next morning, and so he started blackmailing her. And he saw that Emily, she had been around Oscar so much that she was able to forge his handwriting. So she actually forged Oscar's name on the contract that Tobias had, and of course witnessed it. And so that is basically what happened. It was all because of this fantasy, this Emily not wanting to let go of this fantasy, and to her, Charlie Palmer had become a real person. And so as the dawn broke, Ashton, he came back from the hospital, and they talked a little bit. He basically said that he was retiring. He was going to spend more time with his kids and his grandkids, and he was just going to take life slow and steady and enjoy the rest of his time. And so before they parted ways, Matilda, her aunt said they set her up on a blind date, and so she's like, okay, but then they told her it was a certain medical professional. Now, that she's all spooning over Dr. Lynch, right? So she's like, oh, okay. maybe this is not going to be this. Maybe this is not such a bad idea after all. So she gets to the restaurant and she's sitting. She arrives first, and so she's sitting, kind of thinking. Dr. Lynch walks in, and of course she stands up, and they talk a little bit, and then you realize that it's not Dr. Lynch. Because there was another group, there was a group at another table, and of course a woman walks over, I can't remember her name, and she introduced herself as Dr. Lynch's fiance. And he's like, well, we're not actually, technically we're not engaged. And so she's like, she called Matilda Margaret, something like, she was like pulling that whole passive aggressive shit, like faking like she couldn't remember that woman's name, she called her Margaret or something a couple of times. And so while they were talking, of course, she was like, well, come on, we have the group over here waiting for us. And then I'm assuming that was George. I don't know if that was George or Matt, because she didn't say his name. It was one of the paramedics that arrived, and he brought flowers. He's like, your aunt told me this was your favorite. And, of course, Matilda was kind of distracted because she was kind of like, oh man, she was disappointed that she was hoping it was going to be Dr. Lynch. But she sat down and they talked a little bit. And, so Dr. Lynch has a girlfriend. I don't know. Dr. Lynch don't seem like he's all into that woman, especially since Matilda came on the scene, but we'll see how that works. And so, the narrator was basically, they revisited the whole Dragomir, mystery, and how it involved her mother, and how there could be someone not, 10 feet away or whatever that might have the answers to all her questions. And then it pans to the windmill where the guy was working to refinish the photos. And what you saw him working on this nameplate that it said Sadie Hansen, and then it had the book title. So of course, we know that Isabella Wolf came clean about stealing Sadie Hansen's work, and so now he's making the plate for the Golden Pickaxe Award. That's, I guess, going to be awarded to her posthumously. And apparently this guy has some information on the Dragomir and her mammy. So that's basically how this episode ended. And I'm going to talk to you guys later.